So Carson Beck's going to be a Miami Hurricane. Kind of looks like playoff or bust for Miami.
You are Locked On College Football with Spencer McLaughlin, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your daily source to stay up to date with the biggest stories in this, the greatest sport on planet Earth. We have just one game left, and that makes me very sad. This episode is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. I've got Alex Dono of Locked On Canes. Is Marcus Freeman a candidate for the Bears job? These ridiculous stories. And Michigan kind of looks like they're reloading. How much can be expected? All on today's show. But Dono, Carson Beck has set the expectations very high once again for Miami. The schedule is tougher next year than it was this year for the Hurricanes, but when you're just about doubling, based on reports, the NIL package for Carson Beck, who was going to go to the NFL draft, and you're replacing Cam Ward with him, that kind of makes it feel like in Mario Cristobal's fourth season, that's a playoff or bust sort of campaign.
Yeah, I think it was a strong statement for Miami's intent because the alternative to bringing in Carson Beck or someone of Carson Beck's stature, and we talked about it weeks ago that Miami seemingly took a shot at John Mateer when he left Washington State, but he ultimately ended up with Oklahoma. I think Miami realized they did not have enough in the quarterback room, and I've been really hopeful that a guy like Emory Williams, who, for now at least is still on the team, might be kind of ready to step into a starting role. But his performance in the second half of that Pop-Tarts Bowl, Emory Williams, was so alarmingly bad that I think that there were some alarm bells that sounded that Cristobal needed to go out and make a move like this one. And, Carson Beck, obviously this is a guy who's probably going to be drafted, had briefly entered the draft this year, will be an NFL player in a couple of years' time, and he's got all the experience in the world, having started 2 seasons in Georgia and compiling a 24-3 record while there. This is a different quarterback from Cam Ward. Is probably not going to be able to put his Superman cape on the same way that Cam Ward did, but obviously Miami realizes they had a big void to fill at quarterback, and this is about as good as you possibly could have done with Carson Beck. And this is someone that I do believe in. I just think too many Miami fans are going to try to compare him to Cam Ward when this is a completely different player. But I think it's a bold move and an important move because, Spencer, if Miami didn't go out and make a move like this, you're probably looking at maybe a 6-6, 7-5 at best type of season next year, taking your lumps at the quarterback position. So, getting a guy like this and showing that, hey, we're going to put our big boy pants on and replace a guy of Cam Ward's profile with someone of a similar profile the following year. It definitely shows you that Miami wants to contend every single season, and they don't want to take a step back in 2025.
Yeah, it might have had an Auburn feel if they didn't bring in a guy like this, to where you're just watching the season play out and you're going, if they just had a quarterback, if they just had a quarterback. And I think, to your point, that's what Mario Cristobal and company and the OC Shannon Dawson are trying to avoid, is saying, hey, we haven't recruited for the past couple of cycles at the level that we've worked and invested so hard to do so, to be a quarterback away and to pull Beck out of the NFL draft pool. The similarities between him and Cam Ward are kind of astonishing. You've got a veteran guy who was going to the NFL draft, had declared for it, who at his previous stop had a big turnover problem, who you've now convinced to come and play quarterback at Miami for one season with the intention of getting to the playoff or being in that mix at the very least. And the quarterback is going because, well, I can get more money here perhaps than I would have gotten at a different stop in the transfer portal, but also I feel like I can up my NFL draft stock because Cam Ward has given Carson Beck the blueprint here, Dono, to say, hey, you come down here, you can be viewed upon more favorably in NFL draft circles. I think Ward is probably a first-round pick, and I think he gets selected after his final season at Washington State. I don't think he's a first-round pick, but you go out and you're second in the country in passing and you're a Heisman finalist. That turns a lot of heads.
Yeah, I mean, in the case of Cam Ward, my understanding was he he was hearing feedback that he was getting about a 4th round grade a year ago, which is why he decided I really need to gamble on myself and try to raise my stock. And yeah, Carson Beck is trying to follow that same blueprint. He even talked about it. He actually moved in to Miami on Saturday and did a couple of interviews down here, and talked about how this part of the allure to come to Miami was the Cam Ward thing. I think there's a couple of other things that really attracted Carson to Miami. Now, one of those that people have been bringing up on social media, which is true, his girlfriend Hannah Cavender is on the Miami Hurricanes women's basketball team, so that's an automatic connection. And I would have for as good of a recruiter as Mario Cristobal is, I would probably think Hannah, maybe she was the best recruiter in this situation. And then the other thing about, Beck choosing Miami, something Miami has going for them, and, always will when you've got Mario Cristobal and Alex Mirabal, in your coaching staff is it's an excellent offensive line. And I think that's an attractive thing for Beck. I mean, he saw that Cam Ward, basically had enough time to kind of step back and do his taxes in the pocket. Shout out to TurboTax, who's with us now, before he would throw these footballs. And, one of the, the most notable, the two most notable members of the offensive line that Miami lost, they've already replaced their center, Zach Carpenter, with an experienced transfer. And, they lost former starting left tackle Jalen Rivers, but it actually kind of worked out well for Miami that Rivers, unfortunately for him, missed almost half of the season due to injury this past year. And that allowed Markel Bell to have an opportunity to step up and start 4 or 5 games and kind of get himself ready to be the starting left tackle this year. So Miami's offensive line should be really good. And, obviously Beck, as we know, took a bit of a step back in 2024 at Georgia compared to 2023. So there's certainly a hope that with the change of scenery and the increased motivation that comes with that, he can return to that 2023 form. Not to say he was bad in 2024, but 2023 coming off of that season, came into 2024 as a Heisman front runner, and obviously his stock went down throughout the year. So hopefully that can light a fire in him being at a new spot and having something to prove.
You mentioned that Beck is not Cam Ward. They're different stylistically. Beck is more of a pocket guy. Ward is a make incredible throws on the run and improvisation play. That's not really where I see Beck thriving. And also, you touched on the offensive line. I've mentioned this before on the show that the worst kept secret in college football, Georgia's offensive line wasn't good this past season. And I wonder if that wasn't part of the appeal for Beck as well. But Hannah Cavender impacting the college football landscape is just, I don't know if you can create better gossip chatter than that in this world. But for Carson Beck, I wonder, Dono, if he isn't going to be asked to do less than what Cam Ward was, because I felt that Ward went to Miami for a lot of the same reasons Beck is going to. He feels like he can have a better situation for him to thrive. And once he got there and Miami saw what he was capable of, I felt like they were running the offense through him, understandably so. And you had a good offensive line. You had these great running backs who, guys like Damian Martinez, who you paid a lot of money for with the NIL budget that Miami has, who I felt like were kind of minimized at times because, Cam Ward's going to just go and do great things. Now, part of that is the defense wasn't any good and was putting Miami behind the 8 ball quite a bit, so they had to throw. But I wonder if stylistically this doesn't look different for the Hurricanes on offense than it did a season ago.
It should. You were alluding to this, even with all of the superhuman things and the crazy numbers that Cam Ward put up this year. I thought at times Miami could have leaned on the running game a little bit more, specifically in games like the Syracuse game where they opened up a 21-0 lead. And then, rather than, let's say milking that clock a little bit more with the running game, the time of possession did not serve Miami well enough in that game. And the defense was exploited throughout the season. So I think no matter who your quarterback is, I think Miami should lean on the running game more. And there's no reason not to, Spencer, because not only are you're running behind a very gifted offensive line. Miami did lose Damian Martinez. He's, one and done at Miami. He's entering the NFL draft. But, his replacements for next year, the duo of Mark Fletcher, who was a very capable backup. And really, for the first half of the season, Fletcher was running better at Miami. And then Martinez kind of caught on at the second half of the year. And Jordan Lyle, who had a really good true freshman season in 2024 at Miami, is going to be hitting his second year. There's high expectations for him. So there's no reason not to lean on the running game more. And it's not to minimize the role that Carson Beck plays, because Big throws are going to have to be made, which is obviously something he is capable of doing, which is why you brought Carson here. But yeah, Miami absolutely should lean more on that offensive line and more on the running game in 2025 than they did in 2024.
Mario and the clock, Gettysburg. These are just historic battles that everyone is well aware of. Alex Dono, Locked on Canes. Enjoy it as always, Dono. Coming up next, though, Marcus Freeman, a candidate for the Bears. Oh my gosh, this ridiculousness needs to be stopped. That's next. Before we talk about Marcus Freeman, let's talk about today's sponsor, Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was dealing with piles of paperwork and frustrating forms and waiting and wondering and worrying if you're going to get any money back. Now Taxes is easily uploading your forms to a TurboTax expert who's matched to your unique tax situation, an expert who's backed by the latest technology, which cross-checks millions of data points for 100% accuracy. While they work on your taxes, you get real-time updates on their progress, and you get the most money back guaranteed, all while you go about your day. No stressing, no worrying, no waiting. This is Taxes, Intuit TurboTax. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service, real-time updates, only in iOS mobile apps. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. Here we go with some utter nonsense. This is the gossip columnist of news journalism. So there's a report over at On3 that the Bears might consider Marcus Freeman for their coaching vacancy. Now, this comes on the heels of Marcus Freeman about to coach in the national championship game and talking about a guy who isn't even 40 years old, who has, wait for it, never coached in the NFL, hasn't been there before. He's just been a college guy. He is in his third full season as a head coach for Notre Dame. All right. So I'm supposed to believe that Marcus Freeman would be... This is just something that grabs people's attention, and I understand why. And maybe the Bears really do. I have no idea. I don't know who reported the story. I don't know what the sources are. I just saw the headline and realized, man, we're doing this again. We're doing this again. On3 had a similar report of Dan Lanning could be a target by the NFL. Yeah, there's no juice to that, and there's no real juice to this. When you look at Marcus Freeman, when you watch the way he talks about his team, do you ever get the sense that he's got one foot out the door, that he'd jump for another job? Marcus Freeman has pulled off a phenomenal stretch of coaching, which is perhaps why the Bears are saying, should that guy be our head coach? Now, the Bears are a poorly run organization, so they would hire, anybody. I mean, they interviewed Pete Carroll for their head coaching vacancy. As a Seahawks fan myself, I can tell you, Pete should have stopped being a head coach in the NFL about 3 to 4 years ago. But the Bears interviewed him anyway because, well, they're the Bears. They don't really know what they are doing. There's nothing about Marcus Freeman to the Bears that makes any sense for two reasons. Reason number one, he's got a great situation at Notre Dame. Coaches that have made the jump from college to the NFL, in the most high-profile examples that go from being a head coach in college to head coach in the NFL, there tends to be another circumstance driving them away from the school they are at. Matt Rule was at Baylor. That's a good job. It's not a premier program in college football. So he went and tried his hand at the NFL. Now, of course, he's back at Nebraska and got them to their first bowl game and won said bowl game for the first time since 2016. When Pete Carroll left USC to go to the Seahawks, the NCAA was starting to crack down. And when Jim Harbaugh left Michigan to go to the Chargers, the NCAA was starting to breathe down his neck. There's always something there. There's always some other reason that drives a coach out of a premier college job. And Notre Dame is a premier college job. Marcus Freeman's got a great gig. You know, they play a Power 4 caliber schedule every year. They don't have a conference championship game to deal with, which means they can't get a bye, so they get a home playoff game. Oh no, home teams did not lose a playoff game. Texas wins, Notre Dame wins, Ohio State wins. Like, the teams that played on their home field, they all got to win. So he's now in the national championship game. And the second reason, I don't see this as having any sort of legs to it or any sort of seriousness, is Marcus Freeman is way too young. Way too young. I know there's a youth movement that is incredibly popular. Mike McDonald of my beloved Seahawks, by the way, is the youngest coach in all of football. Well, Mike McDonald had been in the NFL for a couple of years. Are even the Bears going to go after a guy in a serious way who has not even hit 40 years old, who's been a head coach for 3 seasons, who is putting on, as I have said, and still continue to believe, the best coaching performance of anybody in the playoffs? Yes, he is all of those things. But at the same time, that doesn't make any sense for Chicago. That's not what Chicago needs. They need someone who's proven for their young quarterback. Caleb Williams needs to be matched with a veteran coach who you hire and everyone can look at it objectively and say, yeah, okay, that has a good chance to work. Nothing's ever guaranteed to work in the NFL, but you're gambling on a young quarterback right now, and you don't need to then be gambling on your head coach at the same time. A head coach, by the way, who comes from the defensive side of the ball. You need to get Caleb Williams right. That's where the Bears' focus has to be. Ben Johnson, the Lions' offensive coordinator, that's the guy who Caleb Williams needs. He doesn't need Marcus Freeman. He needs someone that could give him a stable situation at offensive coordinator who's competent, because they haven't had that yet. Now, I do trust Marcus Freeman's decision-making more than Matt Eberflus, their now fired head coach, but he set the bar incredibly low. I mean, that game against the Lions, just chef's kiss of the Bears are a mess, and Eberflus was not the right guy. But that's too many variables to try to work out. So I don't believe that Freeman is any sort of serious candidate for a head coaching vacancy in the NFL, a place where he's never coached. Lanning, for the same reason. He's never coached in the NFL. He's never expressed any interest other than Lanning's from Kansas City, and he's a Chiefs fan, has been for a long time. That Chiefs job coming open? Yeah, I don't think so. And here's a third reason. Before you take a job in the NFL, which in many respects is seen from a coaching standpoint as more difficult than coaching in college from a schematic standpoint, are you going to take that job before you feel like you're ready? Marcus Freeman's been a head coach for 3 years. Jim Harbaugh had been to the NFL once before. Pete Carroll had been in the NFL and won at USC for a long time. Matt Rule had rebuilt Temple, had rebuilt Baylor, and wanted to try it in the NFL. Marcus Freeman is having an outstanding season, an outstanding playoff run. Do you think he would even feel ready to take that job? That's a real consideration for coaches, by the way. It's an incredibly real consideration. And Pete Carroll didn't leave until he won a national championship. Harbaugh didn't leave until he won a national championship. Matt Rule left before that, and it didn't work out. So I don't give a lot of thought to the idea, other than obviously what I've discussed on this particular segment, to the idea that Marcus Freeman, just because he's having a great stretch and a great playoff run, I bet you such rumors, speculation, articles, whatever, what have you, I bet you that gets tamped down after the national championship game, because I think Ohio State is winning, and I think they're winning comfortably. Their defense is just too good. And Notre Dame's defense is really good. Notre Dame has to play that national championship game like Michigan. They should study that film and say, how can we do that? And then cross their fingers and hope Ohio State comes out with that same sort of game plan and makes the same self-inflicted mistakes that they had in the semifinal game against Texas. That's what Notre Dame has to hope for here. But they have to jimmy their way to a national championship. Ohio State does not. I think Notre Dame has hit their ceiling, and they deserve the opportunity. I'm not saying that they don't, or we should retcon and say, no, they shouldn't have been in the playoff to begin with. Nope, not making that sort of argument, despite a historic loss in the college football playoff. The 2 biggest upsets of the season, 2 of the biggest upsets, by the way, didn't end up keeping teams from arriving in the national championship game. But keep telling me how the playoff has not devalued the regular season in any sort of way. But I think Marcus Freeman is great. I think he's happy where he is. I think he should be happy where he is. I see no reason why the Bears and Marcus Freeman make any sort of sense. But if you feel differently, you may let me know in the comments below per our usual arrangement here. Michigan is reloading, right? But how are they reloading? In some ways, just the right way. First, though, a reminder this episode is brought to you by Game Time. Attending the new 12-team college football playoff is an experience that a lot of people have enjoyed, and you can too. If you want to make memories of the college football playoff, Game Time is the place to go. Game Time has this great feature. It's called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for events even easier. It filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Recently, I used Game Time tickets to purchase an event I was going to. And guess what? The experience was incredibly simple. I got a panoramic view from my seat in the app before I purchased. They had all-in pricing. I mean, Game Time's got everything that you want, and you should check them out if you haven't already. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE. That's LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. So Michigan has added a couple of wide receivers. That shouldn't surprise anybody. If you watch the Michigan passing game this year, they either threw it to Colston Loveland, they threw an incomplete pass, or they ran it. That was every play in the Michigan playbook. There were screen passes, but does that really count? I mean, you could line up a running back in the slot and throw a screen pass to him. But Michigan was such an interesting team this year. Early on in the season, they were about exactly what I thought. And then as the season progressed, they were a little bit worse than I thought. Losing games like Washington or going on the road, losing to Illinois. Like, Illinois is a good team, to be sure, but I had Michigan 9-3 before the year. Took plenty of heat for that, by the way, saying this is not a 10-win team. They end up being a 7-win team, of course, winning the game that nobody, myself included, thought was in any way, shape, or form possible. They beat, by the way, the likely eventual national champions in Ohio State. But Sherrone Moore demonstrated this year he's the right guy for the job. Sometimes you make an in-house promotion and you learn pretty quickly this isn't going to work out. I have the opposite effect, or Sherrone Moore had the opposite effect on me watching Michigan play this season, because I think Michigan way outperformed. They beat Alabama and Ohio State to end the year. Those were landmark wins for Sherrone Moore. The Ohio State one is, of course, at the top, and there's a gap before the next one. But as they look ahead, just because they finished the season strong doesn't mean they don't still have some work to be done. Sherrone Moore is well aware of that, and they've made some notable moves in the transfer portal. So Anthony Simpson's a guy that is going to fly under a lot of people's radar because he got hurt and then was away from UMass this past season. But the season prior, he was wildly productive. Over 700 yards through the air, and he doesn't need to be great. He just needs to be good, solid, capable. This is a guy who's been around college football for several years. He was at Arizona before he spent the last couple of years with the Minutemen, which is a great, not a good, a great mascot in college football. They also brought in Donovan McCulley. Now, this is a guy who's never found his footing yet in the college football landscape. Comes over from Indiana. I don't think the expectations there are quite as substantial, but I appreciate, and it sounds simple, but it just doesn't always happen in the way that it should, particularly at programs that are capable of winning. When a team has a clear, identifiable weakness that even people outside the program can see, when the offseason rolls around, which is, of course, what we're into for all but two teams right now, you need to go and attack it. This is how I felt with Georgia adding Zachariah Branch. You watch the receivers this year, not good enough. Go get one of the top guys available. Miami wanted Zachariah Branch. They didn't land him. Georgia did. So Simpson's not as high profile of a transfer, but he is someone who has proven production at the wide receiver spot. And the question then becomes, what are you doing in the quarterback position? So this is how I think about Michigan right now in January. There's still spring practice reports. There's another transfer portal window. all sorts of dominoes are still going to fall for every college football team. But for Michigan, I think the outside national perception is look at all the momentum they have with those two huge wins over Ohio State and Alabama, and I'm not downplaying those. What I am saying is what they did in those games, to me, is not sustainable over the course of a 12-game season. And I know that because I just watched them try to do it. So they flipped Bryce Underwood from LSU. That's huge. That's great. Is he going to start right away? Is he starting week 1? I appreciate you giving him the weapons that he would need if that's going to be the case, because throwing a guy into the fire and not supporting him, this gets discussed a lot in the NFL, but it's true in college football too. If you don't give a quarterback the right situation or just solid, respectable support, I don't care how talented he is, how many stars are next to his name, or how much NIL money went into getting him to flip to Michigan. He's not going to be able to succeed. So a couple of weapons there, but Michigan's going to have a lot of turnover on the roster as well, which makes them a really interesting team. Because Davis Warren got hurt in the bowl game against Alabama, but from what I've read is expected to be back this fall for Michigan. I don't think that's who Wolverine fans want to see at quarterback, but they might have to see him at quarterback if Bryce Underwood's not ready to go right away. And by the way, most true freshmen are not ready immediately. Now, Dylan Raiola was this past year at Nebraska, and he showed a lot of really good things. Nebraska also went 6-6 when it looked like they were trending for an 8 or 9 win season. And the lack of a consistent passing game was absolutely a factor. Raiola missed a couple of big spots against Illinois. He had a wide open touchdown that would have won the game, and he missed him. Those are the little things that you're going to have to deal with. So if you're expecting this big bounce back resurgent season for Michigan, are you going to be able to get that from either Davis Warren or a true freshman quarterback or a combination of the two? Only if you put together a caliber roster that's at least similar to what they had this season, but you might need to take a step forward, and that's going to be hard. You've got no Mason Graham, no Will Johnson, no Kenneth Grant, to name a few of the losses, the most high-profile ones, off of Michigan's roster. So there's certainly some work to be sorted out. There are guys in there who saw meaningful snaps in 2024 that are key returners on both sides of the ball for Michigan. I expect them to be good in the trenches. I know that Sherrone Moore's game planning, game management, and run game scheme is going to be really good because I saw that all season long. But have to remember, this is still the team that when they took the field with Illinois, got out-talented. That's how it looked. How else do you explain the way that game transpired? Illinois was clearly the best team on the field. So Michigan's in a bit of a tricky spot. But I tell you the move that I really like, and I think this kid is going to absolutely, positively pop this season. That's Justice Haynes. So 5-star running back coming out of high school. He spends the last couple of years at Alabama, and they didn't run the football with him a whole heck of a lot. When Alabama had success running the ball this year, it was with Jalen Milroe. That's how their ground game found success. They were never able to maximize the potential of a guy like Justice Haynes, who can be a really good all-around physical running back. He now goes to Michigan with Donovan Edwards going out the door and Khalil Mellings also going out the door. If Justice Haynes slides in to be the number one guy, I can see him going for somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,500 yards. I have always liked Justice Haynes and what he brings to the table. And you know what a quarterback's best friend is? A running game. So if you're going to have Bryce Underwood come in and start right away, which I'd be here for. That'd be more exciting. That'd be more interesting. If he comes in and starts right away, you're not changing your philosophy fundamentally, and the running back position is perhaps more important at the University of Michigan under Sherrone Moore than at any other school in the country, because you have to have workhorse guys that are physical, well-rounded, shifty, and have breakaway speed, because that's how you're creating most of your explosives. So I think Michigan is on the right track to reloading. I don't know if all the pieces are there right now as we sit here in early January to be a Big Ten conference title contender. But I see the stars starting to align. I see the plan coming together, and I like what Sherrone Moore is doing. But Michigan, again, going to be a very interesting team come the fall. Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time, and until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.